going back to diving into the deep dive review. So specifically with the deep dive review, I'm wanting to know whether the findings of that deep dive support a 100-person cut to the climate science programs.
So, Senator, let me try and interpret a little bit around the question. My interpretation is, was the proposal put forward by the Oceans and Atmosphere Business Unit the same as the outcome? Was that the question? Or was, I'm unsure.
Was the findings of your review? I mean, presumably there's a bit of analysis in the review and then you've got findings at the end of it that with the areas to be cut and areas and growth areas.
So the findings were, Senator, coming out of that we'd grow a number of areas, and specifically on the O&A there'd be a reduction of the order of 100 FTEs with a reinvestment of 35. In terms of the specifics at program level, so you mentioned the programs within that business unit before, I'd have to ask Dr. Wannis to talk to those specifics.
Senator, would it be helpful to describe some of the areas?
No, that's fine. Yes, so the deep dive review, so the results of that at the end of December, after that deep dive review, you came to a position of cuts of 100 and increase of 35 in other areas.
So before Dr. Wannis picks that up, Senator, just to correct, it wasn't the finalisation at the end of December. We're still at options phase, and we went back to a number of business leaders and asked them to do some more work on some of those options. So we're still working up options at that stage, just to clarify the record.
And maybe to add on the clarification, Senator, you were referring to a 100 FTE cut in the climate science area. Just to clarify, what we are currently looking at, and I should also stress that this is preliminary because we're actually going through the process of consulting with both staff and external stakeholders how we manage the transition. The two programs you referred to, Ocean and Climate Dynamics and Earth System Assessment, at the moment our hypothesis is that maybe they reduce in half, so that's not a...
Sorry, that they...
Reduce by half.
By half.
So that is not a complete cut, but it is a significant reduction. And the remainder of the reduction will then come from the remaining 3 programs across that unit.
Thank you for that. So the chief of the Ocean and Atmosphere flagship, Ken Lee, so when was he consulted with in the process of reaching that decision to be cutting 100 staff from his flagship?
So Dr. Lee, as part of that already referred to deep dive process, put a suggestion forward to the executive team. As Mr. Roy has explained, he was then asked to make a more significant reduction in his business unit for reinvestment into other business units.
So when was he asked to do that?
So I spoke to him, and I would have to look up the precise date for you. I asked him prior to Christmas to explore options of how that would look like if he was asked to make a more significant cut. And he then responded to me, and that information flowed into the discussion of the executive team at the end of January.
And so the position of the 100 cuts and the reinvestment of 35, just to be clear, with what proportion of those coming from the climate science programs? Was that specifically what went to the executive team?
So what went to the executive team was an indication from Dr. Lee that given the criteria that we are applying for the deep dive process, that a large share of those reductions would come from the climate area.
And a large share, what, meaning
allowed share of
approximately
the 100, but
65 that you're looking at the moment, or more than that?
so at that point in time, we didn't obviously in detail quantify that because, as you would appreciate from the discussions that we're having now, it's actually very difficult to do that because it requires consultation and drawing on a lot of sources of information. But I think there was an awareness that it would be a significant reduction.
So
Were there specific research groups which were identified to be cut?
No, that was not the information that went back to the executive team.
So, Senator, this was a evolving process that happened. To categorise the discussions with Dr. Lee in the deep dive, he was accompanied and supported by his broader executive team that supports him as well. So I'd hate to couch the picture that this was purely the work of the leader. There were some proposals in there against what we thought was important, and if the Chair, if you're comfortable, I'm happy to go through some of those key criteria that we used. I think it's important for the committee to understand. There were some proposals that we did need to make some changes to the climate area of CSIRO. So that did come from the business unit. As Dr. Wannis put into evidence, the executive team then asked Dr. Lee, as the leader of that team, to say, if we went a bit further than what you're saying, what would the consequences of that be and what that option look like? Our overarching criteria that we use is relevance. So relevance of CSIRO and what we deliver to the strategy, and relevance of what the nation asks us to do, and the impact that we derive from that. But there's 6 key areas that we examined across the whole 9 business units that we have. The impact value that comes from the investment in science that we do, that they've got clear, significant value to the Australian economy, society and/or the environment. The customer need and the market focus is the second one, market attractiveness, sorry. And that talks about where are the customer needs going based on where the science is today, and what's the market attractiveness, and are we seeing changes in the market, whether it's manufacturing, agriculture, climate research or health research, for example. How competitive are we globally? This is clearly one where we rated very strongly in the...
Mr. Ross, sorry, with your indulgence, Chair and Senator Ross, who would the customers be for climate science research?
That's a very good question, Senator, but we met much of the science because it's foundation science. It actually provides then a platform for others to leverage. So it could be, say, Australia's agriculture sector or global agriculture sector that takes the underpinning science and then provides informed advice to that particular sector on how they might work on a seasonal or longer term basis, or how we might have to adapt some grains or stocks for that. It might be the building sector, it might be a range of different sectors, could be public policy as well too. So there's a range of potential customers, and we were looking at what's the interests of those customers on advancing where we are now. So I think I've got to the 3rd level. The 4th criteria is the performance of the particular business unit against what its normal performance indicators are. Financial attractiveness, we live in a real world, as you'd fully understand, and what's the value that's created from a financial standpoint. We need to be able to fund the business, and then what's the financial investment required by CSIRO on a whole of cost basis to the organisation. Because again, we were looking at this very important part of the business in the context of all things we do, whether it's the examples Dr. Marshall used before around the marriage of health and 3D titanium printing, or whatever it might be. These are big responsibilities to try and weigh up the various options on behalf of...
Is there any sort of public good science associated with this? Like, and I'm not being facetious, but
we understand.
Customers of climate change research aren't just human beings, they're whales and penguins and all sorts of things that we study. How do you factor those into your consideration?
Senator, the notion of customer is often a new one for many scientists, and it's an important cultural shift for CSIRO. And last year, that was another one of the really thorny discussions hotly debated in the crowd platform, because you're quite right. Sometimes the customer is the environment, animal life, plant life. But the idea of customer is more to instill a notion that it's our responsibility to always understand that we're not doing the research out of curiosity, we're not doing the science, for entertainment reasons. We're doing it because we have a mission, we have an objective to deliver value. So the idea of these three questions really are what we posed. Who's the customer? Why do they care about what we're doing, and what value are we delivering?
Do you agree, very quickly, Senator Ross, that one of the most famous examples is the discovery of Wi-Fi was discovered out of curiosity by astronomers? I mean, how does that fit in with your analysis you just gave us then?
Senator, Wi-Fi is perhaps not the best example for that argument, because I do agree with the argument in part.
It's a bit of a problem, isn't it?
It is.
The role of CSIRO in Wi-Fi. Yeah.
It is, because when I made that statement, one of the inventors of Wi-Fi said, actually, you got it wrong. We looked at our networking capability and intentionally decided to develop this, thinking there'd be a big opportunity. So it's not the best example, but if I can use my own example, Senator, I invented a laser technology which changed the way eye disease is treated and saved many people's sight. And I did that completely by accident. I didn't know the application when I started. So I agree with you, oftentimes great science, you don't know what to use it for. So you always have to have a little bit of blue sky.
Thank you, Mr Marshall.
Okay.
I'll take this up with you later, but I'll let Senator Ross continue.
Thank you, Mr Roy, for going through those criteria that informed the deep dive process. I have been told that deep dive process ended up with a level of staff cuts for the Ocean and Atmosphere flagship of no more than 35. And that it was unexpected, completely unexpected, for Ocean and Atmosphere to be facing a reduction of 100 staff, and that at a meeting after your announcement, Mr Marshall, Dr Lee, at a staff meeting, said that there were 100 EFTs would be cut from the 2 climate programs of the flagship, and that the changes were more significant than anticipated in the deep dive, which identified 30 reductions and 30 increases with no net change. So can I ask for your response to that, please?
I might respond to that, Senator. It is correct that the plan that the leadership team of the Oceans and Atmosphere unit has put forward contained a cut of 35 staff. I would have to look up where exactly they would have been coming from, but probably primarily from the climate space. The additional reduction, that was a task that this team was given by the executive.
Yes, and so when was that communicated to Dr Lee?
So as I said before, Senator, I spoke to Dr Lee prior to Christmas to investigate that option.
But when was your final decision on the cuts of 100, and it seems to the climate science programs at this stage? You may have moved somewhat from that, which I'm pleased to hear. But when was that decision communicated to Dr Lee?
So again, I would have to check the record precisely, but I would think that was within 24 hours after the decision of the executive team. I would have informed
And so that was the
Dr.
executive
Lee.
team meeting on the 29th of January?
Correct, Senator. Oh, sorry, I think it was 27th? Okay. I mean, we can check those dates, but very close.
And could I request documentation of the communication to Dr Lee?
Yes.
Sorry, Senator, just to clarify, and for Dr Wanis, most of the discussions that were had in terms of communicating the outcome was, as I understand it, was a telephone call between Dr Wanis and Dr Lee. Is that correct? Just to clarify the record, was there actually a...
I did actually... I just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, I think I have written this down, so I'm sure I can find that for you.
Okay. And can I clarify, in that communication, those telephone calls to Dr Lee, that your position was that those 100 cuts were to occur within the 2 climate science programs, Ocean and Climate Dynamics and the Earth System Assessment?
No, Senator, I don't think it was that specifically identified, I would have referred to the criteria that Mr. Roy has mentioned to actually identify in detail the areas where those reductions would be coming from.
But you acknowledge that the majority of them were going to come from those two programs.
That was certainly the expectation.
And when the majority, well, what was your expectation then of those 100? What proportion of that 100 would you have expected to come from those two climate science outcomes programs?
Maybe 70 of the 100.
70 of the 100, and out of two programs that have got 130 staff.
140, yes.
So, Senator, as I mentioned earlier, about half of the capability, the labour capability, the headcount in measurement and modelling capability in oceans and atmosphere.
Could I ask Mr. Marshall, with your indulgence, Senator Ross, how many of those will be coming from Tasmania and other geographical locations?
I don't have that detail, but...
So, Senator, as I said, we haven't yet identified the individual staff members, so it's very difficult for me to answer that question at this point in time. But
could you give us a breakdown by location as it is now in terms of proportionate?
So let me try to find something for you on that. We have currently okay, so in the Oceans and Atmosphere unit, we have 193 FTE located in Hobart. And they might obviously be affected.
Could you break those down into the Ocean Climate Dynamics program, the other program Senator Rice talked about as well?
That's correct. So they would be split across those two programs, but also some in the other programs. And what we don't know at this point in time, where the 35 additions will happen. So some of them might also happen in Tasmania.
And sorry, the other, Aspendale and other locations?
I don't have the figure for Aspendale, I think, here, but we can certainly provide the staff numbers at Aspendale at the moment.
Do you see, after the cuts have been made, whether there will be a critical mass of staff remaining at Aspendale?
I don't know at this point in time, Senator. So what we have decided to do in terms of process, firstly, we wanted to ensure that, given the circumstances, we maintain the best possible capability for the nation, and then we will review the viability of the different sites.
Of the 35 new positions, will any of these be going to those two climate research programs?
That's ultimately a decision that needs to be made in the coming weeks.
So what's the criteria for those new positions?
So the criteria are the same criteria that Mr. Roy has referred to, which is really our investment criteria.
I appreciate, Senator, that it must be a little bit frustrating us not being able to give you more concrete answers, but again, we're very much at the beginning of this process.
In your current situation, it sounds like there has been some shifting and that you are now looking at cutting fewer staff from these climate science programs?
No, Senator. Actually, the numbers that have been communicated to Oceans and Atmosphere at the end of January are consistent with the numbers that we are talking about now. I think what might have happened is some of the other communications that have unfortunately gone out have basically confused this matter.
With the labs that are being affected in Hobart and Aspendale, the research is, particularly at Aspendale, the research there's almost entirely in those two affected programs. So hence my question as to whether you think there will still be a critical mass of people to enable the continuation of those labs at Aspendale.
Senator, just to clarify, the question from you before, we actually have 100 people as of the end of 2015 year at Aspendale. and 290 in Hobart, which clearly is broader than
So
O&A. But it has
Yes.
been signalled, it was signalled to the organisation, I believe in 2014, that it's our long-term strategy, quite separate from this, to actually move our Aspendale staff. It's a very old site, as you may well know. It's not a site that if I was a world-leading scientist coming into a new organisation, I'd be proud to walk into. It needs work. And so we wanted to relocate those staff in good time to Clayton anyway. So we have signalled
But
that quite separately.
you're looking at your current plans to only have about half the, if you were cutting half of the staff from those two programs, that you'd be having a staff cut of at least 50 from that 100.
It depends on how it exactly plays out, but that is a possible outcome. Can I just also clarify, because we have spoken about this before, one of the, I think, nationally important records is actually kept at Aspendale, which is our atmospheric record. So even if we moved away from the site, we would certainly ensure that that record gets maintained in an appropriate way.
Okay, so that would be quite a significant move, I would understand. Yeah. Incidentally, Dr. Marshall, have you visited the Aspendale lab?
Senator, I'm sad to say I've only been able to visit about 22 of the sites. There were a lot more than I realised, and they're a lot farther away than I realised.
So you're having this very substantial impact on these scientists without... do you know much about their work?
Probably not as much as I should, Senator. Although I'd like to correct one of the media announcements today that I don't have any scientific qualifications at all. I do actually have a PhD in physics, and I was a very active scientist for a long time.
Okay.
That's nice to get that on the record.
So moving on, following up some of the questions that Senator Carr was asking about Cape Grim, your clarification statement, Dr. Marshall, said that the Cape Grim station is to be retained, as is the RV investigator. How many staff are required for these research functions associated with Cape Grim and the investigator? And are we going to be able to have those staff, enough of those staff, given the cuts of the magnitude that you're outlining?
Senator, I'll get Dr. Williams to answer detailed questions about the RV investigator. As for Cape Grim, one of the things we're looking at with Cape Grim is to use more technology to help us gather data, potentially with less manual labour required.
So maybe to build on Dr. Marshall's statement, again, and I know this might be frustrating, we actually are currently working through this to really understand the requirements, but
to really understand the requirements after having announced these massive cuts, it seems to me you should have understood those requirements beforehand.
Excuse me. We'll keep to the questions. We'll lower the ambience, and we'll just stick to how we go.
So, Senator, just to give you an indication of the level of engagement currently happening at Cape Grim this financial year, the Bureau is supporting us to the tune of $460,000 at Cape Grim, and we are contributing $234,000 for the measurement component in conjunction with the Bureau. So that is probably one indication of what's currently ongoing at Cape Grim.
As I understand it at Cape Grim, or the work associated with Cape Grim, there are basically three types of scientific jobs that are there. There's the actual collecting of samples, which Dr. Marshall has said you're going to seek to further automate, but I understand it's pretty automated anyway. Translating those samples into data, which I understand occurs at Aspendale at the gas lab there, and then the analysis and the interpretation of the data. Are you still intending to maintain staff doing all three of those types of roles?
So we will ensure that the vital measurements will continue. What the exact nature of our work going forward is going to be, as I said before, that is subject to the work that we've just started.
So when you say the vital nature, what do you mean?
Well, that is something that we need to obviously discuss with the people who are actually working in the space.
I'm astounded that you were foreshadowing cuts of this magnitude without understanding what the consequences of these cuts would be.
Well, Senator, we have taken an overall look at the organisation. We are now in a position to actually work with staff and our stakeholders at the next level of detail. But what I have just provided you is that we believe there is a total effort of around $700,000 per annum going into the work together with the Bureau supporting Cape Grim.
In prioritising, so again, my question was that there's three types of jobs, and from what I could read between the lines, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're essentially saying you've got a commitment to maintain the collecting of the data at Cape Grim, presumably maintaining the gas lab to turn those samples into data. Have you got that intention to maintain that level of work?
So I said before, we work through the specifics, but since you mentioned the gas lab, and to give you at least a flavour of the kind of discussions that we are currently having, so we already had an informal exchange with the Bureau or whether they, for example, want to take on some of the measurement equipment that we are having. So this is not a decision.
As a matter of interest? Was this
Sorry?
in the last few days as a matter of interest?
It's part of the transition program
that's correct.
You've realised is necessary.
And just also to avoid any confusion here, we have not made a decision yet. I think it's important at this point in time to actually look at the different options, to look at the implications of these options, and then take a decision on those. And so that's what we're currently doing.
I'm glad to hear that. And that's moving on to, in proposing this reprioritisation, is it your intention, do you feel that this work no longer needs to be done in Australia, or just that CSIRO should no longer undertake it and other institutions should pick it up?
So, to be very clear, we believe that, for example, measurements of CO2 concentration of the atmosphere, and there are other measurements, as you would obviously know, that are also done at Cape Grim, they are a very vital record for the nation. And they are a long-standing record for the nation, and therefore that needs to be maintained. What we are currently trying to solve is, in frankly a constrained environment, what is the most effective way to maintain that service to the nation.
And what I hear you say then, if you're going to maintain that, the areas that you would see as being much more likely to be cut are the work of the scientists who are doing the interpretation and analysis of that data.
I think it's actually, if I start to speculate what the outcome is, I think it just can start a lot of discussion that ultimately leads to nothing. So I think.
Can I go back to my other question? If you did decide that's no longer going to be done at CSIRO, do you believe that this work should still be done in Australia? We should still have Australian scientists working on doing that analysis and of the data and doing the scientific research and writing the papers, or that other institutions should pick up the work that CSIRO is currently doing?
Senator, if I may, CSIRO does much more than just in climate measurement and climate modelling, much more.
Yes, but you have a world significant team of scientists, and the statement from the World Meteorological Organisation this morning underlined that.
And Senator, we're in the top 0.1% of the world research in agriculture as well, and in a number of other fields. And in fact,
we're all tied to climate science.
Yes.
In every and in which we are investing in, for example, precision agriculture to better inform the farming community.
Me, Dr. Marshall, we haven't got much time, so I would like to stick to the climate science at the moment.
My point, Senator, is that we have to weigh up.
If I could, I would just point out that we've been back for half an hour.
Yep. Now, I've got one more question, and then.
But I'm interested to know. Senator Wish-Wilson came to me earlier and said he was speaking for the Greens here today. So I take it you're now speaking for the Greens here today.
No, Peter
I've still got some questions.
Yeah.
So is there as many questions as you said before?
No.
No.
Right,
No,
so,
so-
No,
okay,
and-
so you're now sharing. That's
That's
fine.
correct, yeah,
I'm calm, but I've got to get back to Senator Carr and we've all got to get home tonight. Well, actually, we've all got to get to bed tonight.
So look,
None of us will be home
the
tonight.
area that I wanted to continue on, and it's a similar theme, the area that we've also heard that is likely proposed to be cut is some of the modelling capability of CSIRO. And you've talked, Dr. Marshall, of the access model outputs continuing to be available for others to use. But do you intend to continue to employ scientists to have ongoing development of the model?
Senator, as I said at the beginning, in terms of headcount, number of CSIRO team members working in measurement and modelling, that number will reduce by about half. So we're not stopping in either area, but we are reducing the labour content. At the same time, we're trying to be smarter about our use of technology and also leveraging the much broader community.
I'm
Senator,
specifically
just
talking about
to
computer
put it-
modelling, which is all technology,
To
and
put
then
it-
you have got the scientists that interpret that and,
Right, but Senator-
and further develop the model.
Senator, open sourcing is a very common way. Many pieces of software
So
are
you're
maintained
proposing
and
that the
supported.
CSIRO access model should have open sourcing
The
inputs
CSIRO
into
access
it?
model is open sourced, Senator. I was using that as an example. It's open sourced already. So it's a great example of how the community can help support CSIRO. But my point is that the output of environmental research in Australia is twice the world average, which is a phenomenal achievement. CSIRO is only 16% of that output, so it's a much broader community.
as we discussed
and over
with-
the years, Senator, more and more funding has moved away from CSIRO and to the university sector, which is very natural. So we need their help to support the model. We're not stopping the model. We're
But
not cutting climate science.
Are
Senator,
you
can
proposing
I-
to continue to put resources into ongoing development of the model? Because otherwise the model will quickly become outdated and irrelevant.
Well, Senator, the whole community contributes to the model.
So I'm reading your answer as no, you don't intend
We're
to.
still working through
Can
the
I-
process, Senator.
Can I maybe try to answer that question, Senator? So firstly, in actually the statement that Dr. Marshall has made to staff earlier this week, I think we put on the record that we believe as the National Science Organisation that Australia needs access, and excuse the pun, to a world-class climate model because that is vital, as we all know, in particular to inform adaptation efforts. So I think similar to the discussion around Cape Grim, it's now our task to work out what is the most appropriate way to deliver that in the long run, because as we also know, this issue of climate change will be with us for a long time. There are a number of different options on the table, and at this point in time, I actually don't want to exclude any. There is the option of continuing with access. There might be an option in working more closely with the UK Met Office, with whom we are already very closely working on. If we go down that path, we need to ensure that critical things for us on the Southern Hemisphere, such as Southern Ocean dynamics, is actually appropriately reflected in that model. We also have probably a world-leading capability in land sector atmosphere interactions. So we need to work through what the best outcome is, but while we are making a reduction overall in the climate science area, there will be continued investment, and we'll ensure that investment among other things, achieves the access to a climate model.
And how about the use of that model in the climate projection science? What are your intentions there? We're actually turning the outputs of the model into products that are usable for the people who need to be adapting to climate change, absolutely critical to climate adaptation.
Absolutely, that needs to happen. Again, since you want to have more detail on the process that's currently ongoing, I actually had breakfast with Dr. Vitesi this morning, and we spoke exactly about that, of how we're doing that, and we explored the option whether the Bureau is providing that or CSIRO, and at this point in time we're basically pursuing both of those particular options.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it at that.
Just